Are you keeping your camera off, Emily? Should I switch
No,
mine
yeah,
off?
I mean, I can switch it on so you can see me. I'm literally sitting on my bed in my PJs, so. Hi, and welcome to Motherhood Around the World, a podcast that celebrates mums everywhere and dives into the nuance of parenting in different countries. This week, I spoke with Anniki Somerville, whose reels on Instagram made me roar with laughter. She's an author, journalist, freelance market researcher, copywriter, and content producer. She lives in London with her husband and 2 girls and has published 5 books. As someone so busy, I'm thrilled that she had the time to come on the show, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so nice to get you online.
Thank you for asking me. I love doing it's actually I love talking to people, and I think one of the things about working a lot remotely is that the only conversations I really tend to have are sort of during the daytime is with the cats. So I love just talking to a proper human being.
I found you through your Instagram, which I think is absolutely hilarious. Your parodies about being a mum in London are very funny. Is that really how you feel at the moment?
You know what? It's funny. I think writer Nora Ephron, I think she said something, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like everything is copy, like every experience is copy. And what she meant, I think, is that every time you meet somebody or you experience something, you can use it to fuel your creativity. You can use it to create something funny. And so I'd say most of the parodies that I do on Instagram, I tend to exaggerate certain characteristics that mothers might have. I haven't ever met people who are directly like that, but there's usually a kernel of truth in that I've met somebody who there's a little bit of that going on. And so I really enjoy sort of articulating that. And also, I think so many of us as mums have that sort of insecurity about not being a good enough parent. And what I hear a lot when I do share content is people going, oh, thank goodness you feel like that too. Or I have that feeling sometimes when I'm in the park that another person might say something to me and I suddenly start worrying that I'm not good enough. And ultimately, sometimes we just need to take ourselves a bit less seriously, I feel.
Yeah, and also give yourself props to know that you actually are doing a really great job.
I'm doing a lot of kind of thinking at the moment about how much kind of negativity we tend to allow into our brains and how we tend to often have the same sort of intrusive negative thoughts every day. And it's funny because the older I get, the more I realize that the narratives are always the same that are coming up each day. They might just have a slightly different flavor to them, but essentially if you boil it down, it's always I'm not good enough. That's always the central theme of it. And I think we all need to say that we're doing our best and we're not perfect, and that's fine. We all make mistakes. And as long as we can teach our children that making mistakes is normal, and if we feel like we're getting a bit out of line, that we can apologise, that's all we can do.
Yeah. Okay, so you live in London. Have you always lived in London?
No, it's funny. I've always lived most of my adult life in London, but when I was younger, as a family, we travelled quite a lot. So we lived in South Africa, we lived in Canada, we lived in different parts of the UK. And actually, what I've done, I think that which many people do, is in response to that, I've kind of created a family life where we've kind of stuck in this area of West London we've lived here now for about 18 years, I think. And I find it very difficult, the idea of moving. I have thought about it, but I think when you grow up in a childhood where you're moving quite a lot, I really value that stable environment where lots of things can be changing, but my home environment is staying the same.
Stability.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you live close to any family? If you've lived there for 18 years, do you have a really nice community around you?
Yes, we do. We don't have any sort of blood family around. My mum still lives in London, but in London, obviously, the distances, she's about a kind of 2 hour drive. We actually don't see her that often. But what I love about the area that we're in is that a lot of families are here. So we tend to look out for one another. We have a park on our road. So we spend a lot of time in the park. My kids' friends are friends that they've known since they were babies. So my 10-year-old, her best friend, she's known since she was about 18 months old. So there's those kind of, and the friendships between the mothers, they change. I must say, I'm still navigating that because I think I can't remember exactly. Somebody said to me, it was a bit of a corny phrase. It was something like, what is it, a reason, a season, or for life? They were talking about the value of different friendships. And I think with motherhood, there's a reason. And so you create these friendships in early motherhood. Those sometimes fall apart as your kids get older. I think what I've found is that I keep changing my friendships. So the people that I was friends with in the early days have sort of become more distant. And as my kids have got older, my needs have changed. And so I've moved on to different friendships.
They say you only need 5.
I think 5 is good. I think that's, yeah. But you can still get triggered. One of my best friends, she had a party 2 weekends ago, and I turned up and she'd got over 100 people had come to the party. And I could feel myself really like going, oh my God, I don't think I've got 100 people. I mean, the funny thing is that I obviously on Instagram, I do have quite a fair amount of followers there. But I was thinking, God, if I had a party, I'd struggle to get 100 people to come. And then I was thinking, but
You don't want a
it's
party
not
with 100 people.
but also it's not the quantity, it's not the quantity, is it? It's kind of like,
Yeah, it's the
if you've
quality.
got, you're always going to have hopefully a couple of people that you feel a greater affinity, just people that you can be yourself with, people that you can WhatsApp and just go, I'm really not feeling good. Or on Friday, I had a panic attack just out of the blue. I don't know what had really triggered it, but obviously I wouldn't announce that to 100 people. In fact, God, actually, I would announce it to 100 people, probably on my Substack or on Instagram, but I wouldn't announce it to a room full of people that were facing me. But I would tell a couple of friends and I'd say, listen, and they would be like, okay, listen, we need to catch up.
Exactly. Oh, I've had a panic attack before. I'm so sorry. That's horrible. Horrible. Tell me a little bit about your journey to pregnancy. Did you need fertility support? What healthcare was available to you?
I had fertility treatment for both of my children, and I was lucky enough, and I think when I reflect on it now, we had it in London, and it was essentially we had one free round, I think was the
Yeah,
rule.
the postcode lottery in
And
London.
yeah, and then the rest were, I had to fund those myself. I was lucky in that I think that the timing of it was such that at the time I was in a very well paid job. I was a managing partner in a firm of marketing insight consultancy. I'd worked my way up, so money was not an issue. Now, what I'm really aware of is that how lucky that was, because I think people, fertility treatment is, it's funny, people who go through it, you tend to just put it behind you. And if you're successful and have the child that you want, you then get wrapped up in parenting. So you tend to move on quite quickly. But I now look and I think, God, the expense of it was, I never regret it because I absolutely, for better or for worse, I wanted to be a mum. I knew I wanted to be a mum. And if we hadn't have been able to have them through fertility treatment, I would have looked into adoption. I would have looked into other alternatives because I just knew that's what I wanted. And of course, I do now. I have friends who are either childless by choice or not by choice. And I've seen the struggle of that too. But I've also seen, what I love about Instagram is I've also seen this new narrative emerging where women are saying, I still have a valid life, a valid identity, a valid future without children. And I don't want to be judged purely on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to support friends. The achievements of friends that are not related to support friends when they get their PhD or when they change jobs or when they, I don't know, ditch a bad boyfriend rather than only celebrating women when they get married or have a baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me, how were you supported during your pregnancy and birth?
I think on reflection, I mean, I've sort of screamed some of it out, but I feel that I was kind of, in retrospect, I was an older mother. So I had my older daughter when I just turned 40. And so for all of my pregnancy, I was always referred to as a geriatric mother because I think you're a geriatric at 35,
Yep,
I
I
think.
was geriatric for my second one.
Um, and not only that, I think I went to one appointment and I was not only geriatric, I was also morbidly obese. That's how she put it because
Cheerful,
I'd
cheerful.
gained. So she gave me two leaflets. I remember one of my last antenatal appointments where I was given the morbidly obese geriatric sort of brochure. And it's funny because now, and this is 10 years ago, there was a lot of fear instilled in me. I think I was made to feel as if there were an awful lot of things that could go wrong. And certainly when it came to the birth, there was a lot of barriers put up in terms of you can't do this and you won't be able to do that and you won't be able to. Obviously, I ended up giving birth in a hospital, and I was lucky in the UK. We've got the NHS, which is incredible. It was a very traumatic birth, and I do think in retrospect, it's funny. I feel like I don't know if it's changed now for women who are going through the experience, but I wasn't prepared for it at all. I think I kind of was prepared for a slightly idealized version. But then when I reflect on it, I think, how do you prepare women without frightening them? And you don't, there's always this understanding amongst women, I feel, that if there's somebody who's pregnant and they haven't gone through birth, that you don't really talk about it. And part of that is because you don't want to frighten them too much. So, and equally, I think I was really unwell after I'd given birth, but I have moved on and sort of screened it all out because I was just like, that was a really, I think we do that sometimes, don't we, with trauma? We just brush it under the carpet and think, oh, I don't want to think about that anymore.
Yeah, that's the only way anyone can ever have a second baby or a third. I think we may be actually sort of pre-programmed to forget about it as much as possible.
Exactly. And it was funny, the second time, I it was a very different experience as well, which is why I think sometimes it's not helpful perhaps to base, if you do go on to have another child, from what I've heard talking to other mums, each experience can be so different. And each child is so different. And so they have different personalities. You are a different parent.
You had your children on the NHS. Was that fully funded? Do you have to pay? How does it work? Do you get to make any choices if you're having babies on the NHS?
Yeah, well, the thing is, because I was an older mum, I think things have probably changed, but I didn't have a lot of choices, so I needed to be induced. I couldn't go over a certain period. Often, when I reflect on it, I think sometimes they were more anxious about the things that could go wrong, and it was more medicalized generally. So some of those doors were kind of shut to me. I didn't really push on the doors to see what was. It had taken a lot of energy. I ended up having 4 rounds of fertility treatment to have my first daughter, and by the time I'd had my second daughter, I'd had 7 rounds. So I was like, whatever needs to be done needs to be done, and I did put a lot of. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I just assumed that the doctors knew what they were doing, and I put it all in their hands. I think much more passive than younger women are now. My sister's just had a baby, and she's 10 years younger than me, and I think she was more empowered, but also she was younger, you see, so she was 35. Yeah, it's horses for courses, but for me it was what I had at that moment. And the NHS is fantastic. They're underfunded, they're struggling, but they did the best that they could.
And 2 healthy babies.
Yes, 2 very big ones as well, which was also my pelvic floor was not prepared for. So yeah, they were both really big babies, and that was the other thing that happened because when I with both of them, well, certainly with Ray when she was born, I wasn't prepared for the fact that they lose weight when you bring them
Oh,
home. So
yeah.
I had this massive baby and brought it home and was really sort of very proud of the fact that I'd birthed this. I think she was 9 pound 10 ounces, something
Yeah,
ridiculous.
bouncy baby.
Yeah, but then rapidly lost lots and lots of weight. I forget that I had a real terror, just a terror that you're not going to be able to keep them alive. That's the thing, isn't it? So when they're kind of losing weight and you get your health visitor coming over and the breastfeeding might not be working and going to plan, and you're literally just like a rabbit in the
Yeah,
headlights.
whatever they tell you, you'll do immediately. And then the next one comes and they tell you completely conflicting advice to the previous person.
Well, I know it was very funny because I was really wedded to the idea that she needed to be breastfed, and I persevered. I did it. I managed to do it for about 3 months. And in retrospect, actually, with my second daughter, I was like, I did it for one day. I did it for 24 hours. And actually, the health visitor who came over the first time, she really would not hear of any other option than breastfeeding.
That's a shame.
And then the second time, I actually just was much more assertive, and I just said, I'm not going to do breastfeeding. I knew how it had gone before. And I was like, I'm getting my sterilizer out. We're doing formula feeding. And I was working at that stage as well. And I'm not saying you can't breastfeed and work, but I'd already, we'd got a podcast that was doing really well. We were doing media for it and interviews. And I was having to leave her from quite an early age, having to leave her with somebody else. And yeah, I think women just need to do what's right for them. And I always say, like my sister at the moment, she is breastfeeding and it has worked out. But I did say to her up front, I said, really don't kill yourself over it. I said, it's not worth it. And you'll find that once the time passes, nobody cares. That's what seems so strange. It's kind of like this period of time where there's like a spotlight on you and all your decisions feel massively important. And then as the time goes on, like the kids are at school now.
Yeah, no one's asking you now whether they were
Nobody
breastfed.
talks about, nobody sort of says on my daughter's report, well,
clearly not breastfed.
her phonics are not quite so great because you didn't breastfeed her, or she's not able to be on the netball team because you didn't breastfeed her. When you move further along the time, you just think, how ridiculous that we become so tunnel vision in that period of time. And especially when it doesn't help mums that are struggling, because it becomes another stick to beat them over the head with.
Fed is best.
Yes.
What was your experience like in the first few weeks after childbirth? How long did you stay in hospital? And then did you go home? Did you go stay with family?
I think I'm trying to remember. I can't remember any of this. It's terrible.
I think the NHS sends you home pretty quick sticks.
Yes, we did. We did. We came out really quickly, and the weird thing was as well is that they kept. This was the strange thing I felt, which this is 10 years ago, but I did feel that what happened was they kept coming in, and my daughter had got a small wound on her hand because she'd been sucking her fist.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept coming in and checking on that. So they kept saying, look, we need to really keep an eye on that. Well, I'd had quite a traumatic birth, so I'd had I can't remember the medical term, so I had a big tear, basically. And I'd had to have a lot of stitches. I think I'd ended up having about 25 stitches. And I was having all sorts of problems in terms of the breastfeeding and just even the mental health. Like I could feel like I was doing some quite peculiar things as the hormones were leaving my body. I was disorientated, and I kept thinking
and sleep
I was
deprived.
Yeah, so we were actually, I remember saying to my partner, I said, oh, what time is the train going? And I said, we need to really catch that train. And I was looking out the window of the hospital, and he said, we're not in a train station. He said, you're in a hospital like that. But I was I'd had no sleep probably for about a week at that stage, because I'd actually been having contractions and not actually in the active part of birth for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think now I was sleep deprived, and the hormones, obviously. And it was weird because they kept asking how she was. So they would come in and the attention would be on her. And I did feel sort of invisible. And I do worry sometimes. I think, again, that balance has changed, because I think now we're much more hopefully aware of at least asking, is the mother okay? Because when I came back home again, I couldn't sit down because of the wound that I had. The painkillers were wearing off. I wasn't breastfeeding. I remember the health visitor coming round, and she said something to me, because we had a nursery and we decorated it. And she said, oh, the nursery is just absolutely beautiful. And she said, I know that parents that decorate a nursery like that, I'm going to have no issues. They're going to be okay.
What a thing to say.
I was sitting in bed on a pillow with this pain, obviously, in my vagina, and couldn't do a number 2, crying, my boobs not producing any milk. And I was just like, the nursery is kind of irrelevant. Like, what the hell are you going on about?
Oh my gosh. Did you get follow-up care for your stitches?
No, I mean, I didn't actually. And it's funny because then I went on for briefly, and last year I was working for a startup, and their main USP was pelvic floor health. And it was funny, I was working for them, and I don't think anyone had even told me that the long term implications of a birth injury. And actually, I went on when I had my second child to have a tear again, and I still don't think I'm completely 100%. So I've had quite a few issues. I love running, so I do a lot of running, and not that I'm super fit, but I do love running. And it's awful. I think a lot of women just live with it. So I just live with the idea that when I run, sometimes I pee my pants,
Yeah.
and that's just it.
What? And you had no there was no option for physio, or here they call it rééducation périnée. And it's
No,
a really big deal. So they'll basically, after you have your kid, after a few months, they'll really check that your pelvic floor is fine, your périnée, and they will send you off to a physio.
no, there was none of that. No, and in fact, it's on my to-do
Yeah, you
list.
need to get that computer game one.
I know I really do need to get it sorted but this is the thing and this is actually what I'm fascinated in, and what I'm hoping to with this next phase of working on is kind of, I take the mickey on Instagram about health and wellness for women, more the kind of things that we're fed on Instagram, which is there's always every week there's some sort of new thing that we're supposed to be doing
Yeah.
to make ourselves
Perfect.
healthier.
Yeah.
And not all of them are scientifically proven, but I'm really quite passionate about the fact that we do need, and certainly as we age, we do need to have we need to rely on certain tools. We need to have certain support that just is not there. And I think that's what I'm really interested in. That's kind of my next phase, is what I want to work on, is thinking about what that might look like. And I'm not talking about medical, see the NHS, it's not talking about that, but it's kind of talking about how do we sort of cut through all of this jibber jabber that's going on and understand what could actually help us.
Yeah, you need to do like a little women's encyclopedia where everyone can actually, almost like a
That's what I
women's
think.
Wikipedia, so we can all say, oh, this is actually worth it. This is absolute bollocks.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking about, because at the moment that's all done word of mouth. So it's all done.
Yeah. And
So
once
I
you do
go to,
go online, and once you do go online to look for something, it's terrifying. You can't actually find the information you need. So you need something where people are
no, and
it's clear.
no, and it's funny because, like, for me, like, I've got certain tools that I use for my mental health, and when I talk to other people, they're like, "Oh God, that sounds amazing," and I'm like, "These are things like that have definitely worked for me." And I think there's science, clinical trials behind it, because that's the other thing, is that I'm worried that a lot of the stuff that's on Instagram, there's no data really to support the fact that it works. And I'm not going to name any names, but a coffee or whatever that's going to stop you from having menopause or feeling the night sweats or getting, to me, I'm like, what's the evidence? What's the actual.
Yeah, and also not just not evidence based. Some of them can be downright dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I think almost all of the mums I know have CBD oil. And anecdotally, that's how things get around. Is that somebody will say, I've tried this, have you tried that? And that's what I want to get, a more formal sense of that.
I would definitely be a client or a member or whatever it is, however you set it up.
Yeah. Well, that's what and I've also, funnily enough, I used to always say that manifesting was rubbish, but I'm kind of manifesting it into being by talking about it.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
not.
Register it now, quick, before we set the podcast out.
Yeah.
Don't worry, only 100
Well,
people have listened. Did you find it hard or easy to choose names? And did you go for very British names?
no, it was actually quite easy to find names. I think because we spent so long trying to have children, so we had a lot of discussions early on about names. And so the names were kind of, I think the only difference is we didn't find out the gender. So I thought Ray would be a boy, and so we'd gone for the Ray, Ray. So actually, when she was a girl, we just sort of adapted it. And actually, with Greta, that was the second name I chose. It was funny, I didn't even think of Greta Thunberg. I didn't, she wasn't on my radar. Funnily enough, another mum on Instagram had named her daughter Greta, and I really liked it. And I was like, oh, Greta, that's a great name. And I'd actually got another name up my sleeve, and my partner said it was too out there. And so I ended up not going for that. And so, yeah, but it was very easy. I think we just wanted to have children, so the names are already there.
Nice. What was your family leave situation?
I had a good maternity leave with the first daughter because I had pretty much a year's paid leave, and I was in a well-paid role, so financially there was no worries there. I think the second time it was a very different experience in that I'd been made redundant, so I was freelancing. I was doing a million different things. I'd sort of launched a podcast. Started writing books. I was doing all sorts of things. I was working for a brand called Selfish Mother, so I was editing their blog, but my income was not quite as steady. So it's funny when I think about it, I'm not romanticizing it. I'm the main earner in the family, and it was feast or famine. We didn't go on holiday, we didn't do anything. I was sort of lurching from one thing to the next. But actually, when I think about it, I was pretty successful because I had lots of creative projects that were going well.
And when the girls went into childcare, what were your options? Were they affordable?
No, not at all. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that in the UK. And actually, I mean, I had to go back to work. So at some point, what happened is was, once I'd sort of had this period of high intensive creativity, I went back into a day job and did qual research, which had been the thing that I'd always done. And actually, again, we were remarkably privileged in that I could support our family with that and pay for childcare. But she was only doing part-time childcare. But there's a lot of discussion about it, obviously, now because the rules are changing, and you can see why so many women can't afford to go back to work because it was just prohibitively high. I think for part-time 3 days childcare for her was about £1,500 a month, and so it is. And that was a childminder. That's not. I don't know anyone in my circle who has a nanny who can afford to have a nanny. So yeah, it's still a huge issue because I think that's another thing that people don't really talk about is that women, they've got to find a job. They've got to find a job that pays well enough that it's going to make sense for them to be able to pay for their kids to go into childcare. And we don't talk enough about the fact that many women now are earning more than their partners. And so the pressure to go back in and have maybe quite a highly stressful job to earn enough money to support a family. I don't think people really talk about that enough. I mean, we've moved away from the model that we can always have a male partner that's earning more than us. So yeah, I love to be very transparent about that because people say to me, they'll be like, oh, sort of visualize that maybe my partner, I don't know, has a very high earning job, and he doesn't. And I think he doesn't mind me saying that. He has more time, which for many people is valuable. But yeah, I'd love to dispatch some of those ideas that there's a lot of women in my situation who are actually carrying full on responsibility.
And in the UK, I know the government keeps sort of launching these programs of a certain number of free hours of childcare, etc. And then you look behind it and there's absolutely no logistical planning to put that into place. So people who are eligible for the free hours can't even get a place.
No, I think the nurseries haven't got the staff. So they're not set up for the sudden rush in demand. I was listening to the radio and there was a nursery manager. I haven't read enough about it to really talk about it in depth, but I do know that there's a gap in terms of there's not enough staff in order to meet the demand. So I think the nurseries are struggling because they can't provide the service to all the people that are getting in touch.
What age do kids start school in England? And is school free?
We do have private schools as well, but my kids go to, I don't even know what the proper word for it is, state school, non-private school. I think my daughter started preschool when she was 4. I suppose it's kind of age 4. Yeah.
So you've basically got to keep them in childcare until they turn 4.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Again, I can't remember the exact age, but that's it. And the thing is that their childcare is not designed around regular working hours. And actually, what's interesting is that even when they start school finishes at 3:15. Well, most women are still at work until 6:30, and so there is still a gap because you've still got to find someone to look after them after school. And obviously the best value is the after school clubs. Those are actually really good in that they're based in the school, and that's what I did when I was growing up. I always went to after school club because my mum was a working mum as well. So yeah, I think that's it.
What do you need to send to school with them? Do they have packed lunches or do they get fed at school?
They get fed at school, and actually, I think they do have. You can obviously they can have packed lunch, but that's one of the new things that's been introduced in the last 12 months is free school dinners for everybody, which is an amazing initiative because I think for many kids the school dinner is it can be the most nutritious balanced meal that they're having because with the cost of living crisis, there's loads of families who are probably struggling to deliver good food. So I think that's one thing that is positive is that I think when I spoke to other teachers, they were saying, I've got friends who are teachers, they're like, we're well aware of the fact that for some kids that's going to be they might even be the only meal they have that day, which is pretty sobering.
Very sobering. There used to be a really great charity that I donated to when I lived in London, Magic Breakfast, that was trying to give kids breakfast who needed it. What are your options when the kids are sick?
I think, like with many parents, I have an argument with my other half about who's going to. It depends what we've got on. He's got a very inflexible job. He can't really not show up. So, usually, if I'm freelancing, I would be the one who would be trying to juggle what I've got on that day. And that's it. There's no other support. And that's another thing is that even things like school assemblies and plays, most working parents they do just have to miss those because you can't do an assembly at 9:30 in the morning if you work in an office. It's changing. I think employers are getting a bit more understanding, but I do feel like often a lot of the systems that we have are designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
What's the phrase? Work like you don't have children and parent like you don't have a job?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, and that's partly why some of the companies I've worked for, they do talk about family values and flexibility, but actually, when push comes to shove, they don't live those values, which is why if you can make freelancing work, that's probably the ideal.
Yeah, I did really enjoy your book, Motherwhelmed.
Yes.
I felt that subject came through particularly strongly and it was really well addressed in that book. Yeah, definitely recommend.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Do your kids do lots of activities? Do kids in general do lots of activities?
They do. And my kids don't do a lot of activities. We're quite laid back generally. I think there's a danger sometimes with some that I think kids have just got too much stuff. But what's happened, I think what generally happens is as they get older, they try lots of different things and then they find something that they really enjoy doing. And so my older daughter loves football and netball, and so she does that. And luckily the school do quite a lot of that. So she doesn't. I always think if the school are providing activities after school and they're cheaper, then take advantage of those. You don't need to spend lots of money. I think that's the misconception that parents have is they're like, I've got to throw money at all these different things. If you've got the money, then obviously it's not an issue. But I just feel like the school are actually providing loads of good after school activities. And so she does that. And my younger daughter doesn't, she's just doing swimming at the moment and that's it.
Yeah, great. And if it's at the school, I'm sure that also their friends are doing the same thing. So it's like a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. And I do feel like there was not this pressure like when we were younger to almost sort of this competitive edge around how much activities they're doing. I just feel like as long as I do think sport's good, especially for girls, actually, for girls and boys. But I think if they can get into a sport, that's more something that's going to carry them through life as well. If they can find a sport that they enjoy.
Yeah, my daughter does tennis. She loves it.
Yeah.
Do you have a car and are you constantly driving?
No, we don't. In London, we do have a car, but we don't use it. Only use it really once a week to go and get the shop. And that's what's put me off a bit about living in a very rural area. I can drive, but I don't really drive. So we use public transport a lot. We get on the bus, and if we need to go somewhere, yeah, and the school is in walking distance.
Perfect. 5-minute city. Yeah. That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
5-minute cities. Yeah. Did the kids get a lot of school holidays? I think in England, they do a lot of half term and then they do big summer holidays.
Yeah, so they have the 6 weeks in the summer and then they have half term holidays as well. It does feel like a lot of holidays. I think there's discussion now about trying to make the summer maybe shorter, I thought. I mean, that's a massive challenge again if you're working because you've only got a finite amount of holiday if you're in a sort of full-time job, and there'll be other parents who want to take time off in the summer as well. And then the other complication you've got is if you do ever want to go away, everything is expensive. I do feel whenever I talk to parents, I mean, there's a holiday club at the school, and so it's like designing that 6 week period so that they can work. They're having to really put a lot of planning in there so that they can do maybe a week in the school club, a week maybe doing something else. But it's a big challenge.
It just gets so expensive and so stressful having to deal with all the logistics.
Yeah. And the thing is, if you're freelancing, obviously you need to work over that period. And actually, even if whatever job you're in, you can't take 6 weeks off. So you can only ever take like a week off. And so the other 5 weeks, you'll be managing that childcare.
What's the split on housework and what's the split on parenting? Are you guys more together as a team or do you take turns?
I think we take turns a little bit. I feel like I am more triggered by mess.
Mm.
And so I choose to tidy up all the time. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like if I just left it, what would happen? If I just left the mess and didn't tidy it up. I think anecdotally, when I talk to other people, my partner does more than some other partners, but it's the number one argument. And I think it is in every relationship. It's just kind of like how much you do and how much you don't do. And it's really boring, but that's just the minute that children come into the equation, that is going to be the bone of contention because your time's not your own anymore because you're spending so much time looking after other people.
Yeah, and so much laundry. How do kids make so much laundry?
I know it's washing and it's also hanging the washing and washing away, and it's every day, isn't it? It's like it's not, it's never done. And so that's where I can see that people can develop real issues with it because you'll never be done.
What's bedtime generally?
Bedtime is actually quite smooth now, but that's only because we are more relaxed maybe. I mean, actually, because they're 5 and 10, so the 5-year-old goes to bed around 7, half 7, and my older daughter actually stays up with me, which some parents might say, oh, that's terrible. But I go to bed early and she comes to bed with me. So not to sleep with me, but basically I go to bed about 9 o'clock. And so I had a period of time where I was trying to get her to go to bed half an hour earlier. And I was like, what am I doing?
Just wasting the half an hour.
I'm wasting half an hour. And it's funny because we sometimes will come up together and I say to her, look, I'm not talking to you now. I'm going to read my book, and she'll sit and read next to me. And I think that's fine. That's a compromise. And there'll be a period when she becomes a teenager where she won't want to do that anymore. So I sort of feel like it's small wins.
Yeah, and quite nice. I mean, you can't really fault that if she wants to read a bit longer. It's like quite good at
reading, exactly.
Seems like excellent parenting from my perspective. So if they're in bed by 7, what time do you guys have dinner or tea?
I think we have tea. My partner, I am making a massive generalisation, but he is from the north and he has a proper tea. He's always had tea at 5. And so that's one thing we do. We're quite rigid compared to other families in that at 5, adults eat with children. So I've got friends who they'll feed the kids at 5 and then they have their dinner at 9. But we do all tend to eat together at 5. And that's one thing I think which is quite good is that we can do that, obviously, because my partner's not in an office. I'm not in an office at the moment.
And are they involved in any of the grocery shopping or the cooking?
Not really, no. I think they do a little bit. My older daughter's really interested in different types of food, so she likes to experiment a bit. She loves Asian food, so she has started sort of making noodles and things like that and reading recipes. But yeah, no, not yet.
What does a typical weekend look like in your family?
I think a lot of other people's weekends are very busy. Our weekend is really... There's some activities, but it is generally just us and we go to the park and that's it. And sometimes I get a little bit worried because I listen to other people's weekends. I mean, for me, there's a lot of tidying and cleaning. I do feel like that. Yesterday, definitely felt that. But it's all the drudge. So it's like we have to do the shop. We do swimming in the morning, and then there's a lot of admin to do, sorting out the stuff that we haven't done in the week. I do like Sunday. Sunday, we're very relaxed about telly. So we're just like on the Sunday, we might go to the park for a bit and then the telly's on pretty much all afternoon.
That sounds nice. Cup of tea, telly in the background.
And I think I feel like because I'm older, I feel like my generation, I feel like telly, if we're watching it together a little bit, or I might be sat reading with the telly on, that's to me is a better option than having them with iPads watching their own stuff, which I don't always know what that is.
My dad lived in the north of England when I was younger, and that feels exactly like that sort of English household that I used to spend time in. My stepmom kind of flicking through the weekend supplements, dad watching something. Oh, it feels really cozy.
It does. I do. I think there is something cozy about it, isn't it? It's kind of it's funny that in the future we'll probably mourn those days.
Being a mum can be isolating. Did you have any local communities or support networks when you were a new mum?
Yeah, do you know what I really loved was that in the UK, or certainly in London, there's a lot of baby groups, and many of them happen within churches. Churches in the daytime will have mother and baby groups, and they're really accessible because you can go in. It might be like £2.50 or something. The mums get a cup of tea. There's loads of toys in there. And I'm a big kind of advocate of those because I know that my sister moved to Aberystwyth actually in Wales. And one of the first things I said to her, I said, have you got baby groups there? And she said, oh, I don't think I'll need those. I think I'll be fine. And I was like, no, do you know what? You really will. Because there's just some days where mums, I feel, need a little bit of a plan, even if it's
Yeah, you need to get a reason to get out of the house.
to get out. So, and I think it's very difficult to transition, that transition from work into motherhood. So I'd always had a routine. I got up, I got dressed, I went to work. And so suddenly when I had kids, I got really anxious that there was no plan. It's like, what is this? Do I just walk around in my dressing gown every day? It was really not working for me because I think we all like a routine. I think we all like to have that sense of this is what I'm doing. And so I always develop this routine. I go out in the morning with them, and I still do it now actually. So we often our activity will be going out in the morning when they were babies, go to a baby group, have a cup of tea, have a chat, come home maybe for lunch, or maybe even sometimes actually I made a friend with another mum, and we would literally be out pretty much the whole day with the buggies. And I realise now, I was talking to somebody about it on the weekend, and I was saying literally we were keeping one another going. We would text each other. We didn't even know what we were doing. We'd be like, right, we're going to, and we would find a baby group. We'd go, there was a baby group on every day, practically. And then we would go to the baby group. We would then have lunch, and then we would go, let's go for a walk. We were absolutely exhausted because I think we would walk for miles and miles. But interestingly, she was going through a breakup with her partner at the time. And I was I was having this cognitive behavioural therapy, and I was really trying to fight a bit of a battle with my mental health. And so I feel like that kept us going. And so my advice is always like, find a baby group if you can. I don't know if they exist in all these other cultures, but there's very little that is free. But these baby groups, what I love, and it might be different if you live in more affluent areas that you have to pay for everything. But what I did love is that there were diverse mums in there. It's accessible to all people. You can go in there. There were also some dads who were taking paternity leave, and you didn't have to be religious, and you got a soggy biscuit and a bit of a lukewarm cup of tea. There was some singing, there was some puppets, and that's all you needed. I really hope that those continue because I'm a big, they really saved my life.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that here. That definitely was not a thing. But I wish they were because I knew that they had existed. That's okay.
They're so honestly,
yeah. Like imagine exactly how it's like the church basement with there's a specific smell to that room, and there's the toys.
Oh man, I mean, some of them were brilliant. Like there was one that was literally like a 5-minute walk from here, in a Baptist church. And it's all run by volunteers. Yeah. So nobody's getting, we did have to, I suppose the money went to the church, and they did have to buy, they'd buy orange squash, Ribena, there'd be little biscuits, and they'd have singing. So they'd put all the toys in the hall. So If you had toddlers, they would be running around. If they were babies, they had like a little baby area where they'd had play mats and stuff. You would see mums there, and some of them would be really struggling. You know, somebody who's really like trying to breastfeed and they can't get their kid to latch, and there would always be a slightly older woman who would, you know, usually working in the church, who would sit next to her and just say, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want me to hold her for a bit? And I just think that is incredible. It's just, that is the kind of little things that make a huge difference to a mum's experience.
How does society view kids in England? Are kids welcome everywhere, or do you sort of more go to kid-only places? Are people helpful with kids there?
I think we're in a funny sort of, we're in a transitional phase because we've got lots of intergenerations with different parenting beliefs. We've got some of an older generation, maybe the boomers, who believe that we're too permissive with our parenting, that we're not strict enough. And then we've got a younger generation who feel fully on board with kids should be allowed freedom, they should be allowed to do what they do. We do gentle parenting, we're empathetic. And I think that what I quite enjoy in terms of humour is seeing that rub up against each other, because if you're in any kind of restaurant, you will see that fully articulated. So you'll see some kids will be running around free and feral and loose, fully, their parents would have checked out, they'll be having a few drinks, they'll be having a good time, they might not even be drinking, that's their parenting system. And then you'll have some older people who will be there who will just be like horrified and perplexed and worried. I think it's interesting with the French stereotype, because both of my sisters are half French, so their father was French, they're half sisters, and so my mum spent a lot of time in France, and she always says to me, she goes, "Oh, French kids," and there were books written about it, wasn't there? There's quite a
French kids don't throw food.
So, yes. And she said, why don't your kids ever sort of... She's always talking about how well behaved French children are, and she was bringing up this example of how she thinks French kids can sit at a table for 3 hours. She said, I do remember when your sisters were younger, that when we had our French relatives over, they would all sit and we'd have these long 3-hour-long meals, and the kids wouldn't move, whereas my kids would be getting up, they're going under the table, they've walked off, they're eating something, they've gone to go... Yesterday we sat in a pub garden and my youngest started to feed the dogs water. So there was like a water bowl. So any dog that was in the garden, she was filling it up with water and then feeding these different dogs. And my mum was like, why doesn't she just sit still? Can't she just sit still and drink her drink?
I would gently suggest that your mum might be slightly misremembering the length of those lunches. I can definitely confirm that French children, on the whole, can be well behaved at a dinner, but that is not... There's always an exception to the rule. My kids have definitely crawled under the table at a restaurant and eaten off the floor and done all the normal things that kids do. And they can also explain that they want their favourite cheese and sit through a 2-hour meal. But there's a huge variation within those two extremes.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of...
I can literally picture what you're saying in London about going to... I'm picturing a Carluccio's when you're telling me this. Does that still exist?
It doesn't. It's funny. It's actually closed, but that is exactly the kind of place.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I feel like I can see it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
And I've been that parent, actually. So again, I don't want to judge, because I have been that parent that's checked out a bit. I'm very much led by other parents. So if I go somewhere and the other parents have checked out, I can sometimes be quite gullible and find myself doing that. And certainly there was one pub locally where, and I've been sober now for 3 years, and I think that's influenced my behaviour a bit as well, but the kids would actually run riot in the garden. They really would, like, run around, and there were people trying to have a quiet drink. And now I can see it from both perspectives. I'm like, that's actually not fair. Like, to take over an environment like that and to totally disrespect anyone else who's there just because you've got kids and you feel like you have the right to claim that space, I don't think that's fair.
No, there's definitely a time and a place for different styles of parenting. I read a really great article on performative parenting. So, for example, if you're on an airplane and you're telling your child to stop kicking very loudly, Now, I've told you this is the last time. If you kick that chair again, there's going to be consequences. Like, you're saying that for the other passengers. You're not saying it for your kid.
No,
It
no.
was such a good article. I'll see if I can find it and link it in the show notes.
It's really awkward when that happens. I was in the park yesterday and there was a dad there and there was a kid who was just being a real pain in the arse. And they were basically, every time somebody dug a hole in the sand pit, this kid would fill it in with sand, and it was driving the kids were going insane.
Yeah.
They were crying and weeping and going mad. And this dad was really struggling because he kept sort of saying, he was like, don't do that again. You must stop that, Ursula. You really are driving you must stop doing that. You know, kept going. She was just blatantly ignoring him. And I did really, at one point, I took my kid and walked away because I knew how embarrassing it was for him. And I was like, listen, you just do what you need to do and don't worry about what because at the end of the day, like it is when your kid is not doing what you want, it's awful.
Yeah. You feel that cringe of, oh, first of all, I have to discipline my kid who's not listening. And second of all, I have to do it in front of all these people who are really judging me.
Exactly. It's terrible.
What's the government support for families in the UK? And is there anything you'd change at a policy level?
Oh, God, I don't know if I can answer that question, to be honest. There is obviously child support, which you get if you're within a certain income bracket. And I have had that before, but I wouldn't be able to accurately talk about it.
Yeah, no worries. It's a big question. What are your favourite traditions in the UK?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what my favourite... You know what? I love bonfire night and I love Halloween. I think we obviously always have fireworks on bonfire night, and at Halloween we've probably come a bit more like at the States where kids go trick-or-treating and they all get dressed up. And in our neighbourhood where we are, everyone puts pumpkins out. It's getting more and more kind of American influence. So people are going much bolder. They're putting like displays out, and it's quite creepy. The adults are dressing up, and my kids really enjoy it. They love it.
What do you love the most about being a mum in England?
I love the fact that I think there is a lot of diversity, and that's a lot of what the comedy, the content, the writing that I kind of produce is around the fact that we don't have one parenting style. There is, within certain parameters, there's quite a lot of differences, and there's lots of different types of parents. I like the fact that living in London, there's diversity in terms of the paths to becoming a parent. There's within the school, there's people who have been through fertility treatment, adoption. There's grandparents who are looking after children. There's different kind of sexual orientations who have become parents. There's whole diversity. And that's what I enjoy, is that my kids are getting to see that, because I want them to come into contact with lots and lots of different types of people. And I want them to be able to see that there's lots of different roads to becoming a parent, and there's no standard 2.4 heterosexual or heteronormative style.
Oh, I really appreciate your answer on that. What is your biggest fear raising kids in England?
There's two. One's around a more global issue, which is around social media and kind of the fact that we're, in effect, from what I can see, and it's ironic because I'm on social media, but it's unpoliced, it's ungoverned, and we're feeding it to our children. And we're seeing the impact of that on mental health, and nobody's taking action on it. And we're kind of expecting the big marketing corporations to take action, and they won't, because it's profit driven at the end of the day. So that really scares me, because I came from a model where, my content on telly was governed by legislation. If you're making content for children, there were certain laws in place. You couldn't talk about certain things. And now that all of that's gone, and I think we're seeing that, and we don't know what to do. And all the parents I talk to whose kids are getting older are very frightened, because they don't know what to do. And even if they choose to cut off the smartphone and say you can't have a smartphone, the influences come in via the peer group. And so unless you actually go and build yourself into a kind of small cave in Wales and live underground with no Wi-Fi, it's very hard to work out how you navigate that. And actually the challenge is that your kid wants access to that all the time. So all of your arguments are around that. And that I'm already experiencing that. And then the other thing is things like crime and poverty. That worries me. And it worries me because I feel empathy towards other people. I feel that we're becoming harder as a society. I think we've become more obsessed and egoistic about just looking after us and our own. And I'm not. I sort and I worry that we're becoming more individualistic. I think that's actually another thing about social media sometimes is that we've become very insular, don't see beyond our own universe. And what you're seeing in London is you do see it. I don't want to be too depressing, but you do see a lot of knife crime, a lot of drug addiction, a lot of homelessness. And these things aren't all interrelated, but they're all because we don't have enough support for people who need it at different stages of their lives. And so we see the impact of it. But I don't know, my worry is a bit that is what kind of society will we have if we continue to ignore it?
Yeah. Okay, well, that is all my questions.
That was brilliant. That was so comprehensive as well.
So thank you so much for joining me. That's been such a good chat. And I miss London.
I know. Well, I hope you'll come and visit and maybe we can have an in real life coffee.
Yes, that would be fab.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Have a nice day. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you liked it, please rate, review, and subscribe, which will help other people find us. See you next week.